Hey, this is Joe from Home Studio Corner, and today I want to talk to you about my 4 rules for mixing. Now, I've been doing these rules videos for a little bit now, and they seem to be really connecting with people. And I think the reason is that there's just a lot of information out there, and even though mixing is not the most complicated thing in the world, it can get a little squirrely, especially with all the information out there. Now, I've been doing this since 2009, which is helping people get better mixes, help people learn how to make good music in a home studio environment. And that puts me in a unique position, both as a musician and producer myself, but also as the guy who's helped out thousands of people over the last decade. I've seen a lot of things. I've seen a lot of things, and I've learned a lot about what works and what doesn't when it comes to making music in a home studio, especially if you're just starting out. So I've got my boxes created because all rules like to be boxed in, don't they? Right. Let's jump in and figure out rule number 1. All right. Rule number 1. This is going to be the most important one, I would say. Always, always, always aim for. Ready? You ready? You ready? What's the word? Balance. That word is so important. I'm going to highlight it. Balance is the name of the game. This is everything. This is what we're doing as engineers in the studio, as musicians, whether you're in a band playing with other musicians, whether it's just you and a guitar and you need to balance the volume of your voice with the volume of the guitar in a room full of people at a house show. Balance is so incredibly important. Back in the old days, they used to call audio engineers balance engineers because of how important, like that's what they did. They balanced things. So what are we talking about here? Well, there's 3 types of balance I want to go over with you. The first is the first part of the cheat code from Contra. If you remember that, up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, select, start, or select, start if you're playing 2 players. People will argue with me on that, but I'm right. So here are the 3 types of balance. What are they? Well, these shapes probably don't make much sense. Up and down, that's volume balance. That's faders, gain staging. That is getting the levels of your tracks in your mix balanced together. So you get them all to where you can hear everything and you're not clipping your main bus. It sounds simple, but it's super important. More on that in a second. The second one is left and right balance, stereo balance, the balance of panning. If I have a really great killer sounding guitar track, that's a guitar, and I love it, and I pan it over to the left, well, now I've got to think, okay, what, if I leave it there, then I've got this stereo mix that's left heavy with that guitar. What am I going to put over here on the right side to balance that out? That's what I'm thinking about when I'm recording guitar. It's also obviously what I'm thinking about a lot when I'm mixing. What do I do to achieve a left and right balance? You could put everything up the middle. That's technically balanced, but we'd much rather take advantage of the stereo spectrum. So if something goes left, something else has to go right. Third type of balance is frequency balance. This is the one people will jump to. They'll want to pull up their big EQ plugin and want to make the EQ curves look all cool and yeah, look at that EQ curve. But while it is important, I would say the first 2 are more important, and then use the third to achieve frequency balance. And what I mean by that, if you've seen my rules of EQ video, there are different bands of frequencies, and we want them all to be roughly the same volume. We don't want there to be way more in the low mids and way more in the highs than everything else. So we use EQ to balance those things out. Okay? Balance engineers, right? That's rule number 1. All right, let's dive into rule number 2, which is similar or builds upon rule number 1. I feel so fancy when I say the word upon. And that is this: no plugins too early. What a lot of people like to do. We love plugins. We love toys. We want to pull out our plugins, slap them on all our tracks, and just have fun. I'm all for fun. I love fun. But you will not have fun if you start grabbing for your plugins before you've done what I consider one of the most important parts of the mix process, and that is the static mix. What's the static mix, you ask? The static mix is this right here. Getting your up, down, and left, right in order. Meaning you're going to work on getting your levels and your panning sounding great. Now, the static mix, it can take upwards of an hour or more. I had a song I remember where it had 60 or 70 tracks. I spent like an hour and a half just on the static mix, 0 plugins involved, just to get everything where it needed to go. Okay, what is this? What does it sound like? Where does it happen in the song? Do I want to pan it middle, left, or right? How loud does it need to be? And then do that over and over again to get everything where I can hear everything in the mix. I've got a good balance, up, down, left, right. That's our static mix. Once we've done that, then we can move on and start working on things like frequency balance and then using compression to further smooth out the up and down volume balance. But static mix for me is so incredibly crucial, and I really enjoy it. It's one of my favorite parts of the process because you get things like a bunch of faders lined up, right? And they each have pan knobs on top of them, and you get to just move things around. It's the part, like the reason that that fader broke. Ugh, that doesn't look like a fader. Anyway, it's the reason that we get into mixing a lot of times. We see somebody moving faders, either on a physical control surface or mixer or in a studio. Like that's what we think about when we think about mixing, is moving faders and then moving panners left and right. That's the game here with the static mix. Don't blow past this. Don't go so fast and be so eager to reach for your favorite plugin that you don't get the balance right. What ends up happening, here's the reason why. What ends up happening is you start using plugins on a mix that is not balanced, and you end up with just more imbalance, right? I've had this happen so many times. Kind of a common example where I'll have a bass guitar and it just won't sound right, and I'll pull out things like EQ and compression and maybe even distortion, and I will spend upwards of 20-30 minutes on that bass track to make it sound good. Then I'll take all the plugins off and say, oh, it's just too quiet, and I'll take the fader and turn it up. Problem solved. And then maybe use just a little bit of EQ and a little bit of compression. That is a very common scenario in mixing. We tend to think that we need to put all these plugins on every single track, when in reality, if we set them at the right volume, we might not need those plugins. Or if we do, we can wait and use them until later so we don't jack things up. That takes me very nicely into our next rule, which happens to be rule number 3 for those math nerds among us, and that is to be this isn't going to fit, minimalist. Look at that. Fits perfectly. Now, what do I mean by that? Do you remember that old game show? I don't think I ever watched it, but I heard about it. And it was called Name That Tune. And the idea was they would tell you something about the song, and then you would say, I bet I can name that tune in 4 notes, or in 2 notes, or in 3 notes. And then they would play the notes and you would say, that's, Fly Me to the Moon. And then you'd win points or something. When I approach mixing, I think of it a lot like, this just, as I'm saying this sounds super weird, but I think of it a lot like approaching something like Name That Tune. Like these, let's assume these are my channels in my mix. I've already done my static mix. I've got things sounding good. And then my goal is to get these sounding as good as possible with as few plugins as possible. So instead of just loading up this thing with just plugin after plugin after plugin, what I'll do a lot of times, and this will come as no surprise if you've seen some of my mixing videos, is I'll do something like this. I'll take all of these tracks and I will send them over to some sort of a bus. Okay, something like this. And then instead of putting plugins on each of the individual tracks like that, I'll actually just put a few plugins, like 1 or 2, on the bus itself. And I will see, and I'll say to myself, all right, Joe, can you make a good mix out of all these tracks with just 1 or 2 plugins on the mix bus? And I'll tell you, more often than not, I can. Or if nothing else, I can get it 80 to 90% of the way there with just 2 plugins, and then I can come in and I can put an extra plugin on that snare drum, an extra plugin on that kick drum. So I'll do this for the big groups of things in my sessions: drums, guitars, vocals, acoustic guitars and electric guitars separately, keyboards, strings, background vocals. They'll each go to a bus. So instead of mixing, 24 or 48 songs, I'm really just mixing 8 faders. And then, yes, I'll go back and I'll do things on the individual tracks if needed, but I've shocked myself so many times with how I've been able to make this sound amazing, and there will be 0 to 3 plugins on my entire drum mix because I was able to get the job done here. Now, none of that can happen if you go for plugins too early or if you don't get a good balance to begin with. But if you do rule 1 and you do rule 2 well, then when you get to rule 3, you're able to do this. It's pretty powerful. And you either believe me or you don't. And you either get it or you don't. And the only way you can get it is by trying it. And I've had people say, Joe, I've heard you say this for years, and I finally tried it the other day, and holy crap, it worked. And I'm over here saying, yes, it does. Rule number 4, pay attention. This one's a little weird. I've not talked about this a ton. Pay attention to your body. Okay, here's what I mean. Let's say you are working on a mix, okay? And you got your speakers set up over here, and they're just blasting some groovy tunes, right? And you're sitting here in the middle. You're a bald-headed like me, and you got this really cool chair, okay? And you're sitting here, and you got your hand on the mouse, and you're working. Maybe you're working for a couple hours, maybe 2, 3, 4 hours. Maybe it's just been 30 minutes. These are supposed to be legs on the chair. And maybe you're at a big mixing desk like that, and it's got tons of channels and knobs and faders. Anyway, here's what happens. At some point, something's going to happen to your body as relates to this music, okay? Perhaps you're going to be listening to a really beautiful ballad, okay? And you're going to start tearing up, and there'll be tears in your eyes dripping down your face. Take note of that. Or maybe it's a faster tune, and it makes you want to stand up and dance. That's you dancing, by the way. Or at least nothing else, it makes you want to bob your head to the beat, like, yeah, and you close your eyes and you bite your lip and you're like, yeah, this is good. When these things happen, when I have any sort of physical response to the music, I either want to dance, I want to cry, I get goosebumps, which I don't know how to draw goosebumps. When any of those things happen, I make a note of it. It's a big deal to me, because what that means is all this work that I've done has created an emotional connection with my brain. It has caused me to feel something, either feel the happiness and the desire to dance, or made me feel sad or emotional, reminded me of something really great, or it makes me bob my head because I'm really grooving to the music. That means I'm almost there. That is a big red flag that says, hey, you are real close to calling this sucker done. So I will plant a flag in my brain, and I will say, okay, let's start trying to land this plane as soon as possible, because any more work that I do is potentially going to break what I've done here, and I'll no longer connect with the music anymore. And I'll have gone too far. I will have over-mixed the song, which is something a lot of beginners do. Remember, be a minimalist. Keep it simple. Go for balance. Use plugins sparsely, none at first, and then slowly add them in. Use a minimalist approach. Mix that song in as few plugins as possible and as few moves as possible. And then when you start bouncing to the music, then start to try to land the plane and see how quickly you can finish and be done, because that means you're there or you're close, and you can start finishing things up so you don't overmix and lose that mojo that you have right there. Okay, thanks so much for watching this video. If you want to learn my 5-step mix process, which coincides with this super well, you can get that for free at 5stepmix.com. And by the way, I've got a new mixing course, brand new mixing course coming out very soon. And the only way to find out about it, or at least to be the first to find out about it, is to be on my email list. And that's what happens here. You sign up to my email list, I send you a free 5-step mixing guide, and then when that course is available, I'll send you an email and you can decide if it's right for you. No pressure, as always. You can sign up and unsubscribe whenever you want, and we can still be friends, but head over to ye5stepmix.com, and I'll be letting you know about that course soon. Thanks so much for watching this video. Share it with a friend. Be sure to subscribe. See you in the next one.